Welcome to the Kashrut Mythbuster series. Today we are going to talk about kosher cheese or non-kosher cheese. In other words, what is the story with the kosher cheese? So the answer to this question will take some time, as there are many misconceptions regarding kosher and non-kosher cheese, or I should say non-certified cheese. In addition, since the kashrut industry controls both the supervision on production and the halachic literature, we have a situation where an exorbitant pricing system exists in which what is considered strictly kosher cheese, and unfortunately sometimes of rather inferior quality, could cost twice or three times as much as a similar non-supervised cheese. This creates a considerable economic interest in preserving a state of affairs where non-supervised cheese is deemed non-kosher, despite the difficulties it creates for observant Jews. Ideally, we should have separated the system that certifies products as kosher from the system that decides what is kosher and what is not, technically, but this is not what we have today. As I mentioned in other articles and classes, one cannot brush aside the cost factor, since the Talmud stresses in many places that we must not cause people to spend more than what is necessary, or in the language of the Talmud, "At-Torah hasa al mamonan shel Israel," meaning that if there's a possibility to do the same thing for a lesser amount of money, this should be the ideal, especially when we talk about products that are being purchased by tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, and then there are some families that receive food stamps from the government in order to buy cheese that is already coming with a higher price tag. So let's start from the current situation, then go back to the origins of halakha. We can distinguish between the following levels of kashrut of cheese, which I am now going to mention in descending order, starting with what people believe is most kosher. So what people consider to be the most kosher cheese is cheese made of halav Israel or cholav Israel. That is milk which was milk under Jewish supervision and was also produced under supervision. But as we shall later see, labeling cheese as cholav Israel or Jewish milk has an element of misinformation due to the fact that the rabbi stated in the Talmud that you cannot make cheese from non-kosher milk. Therefore, there's no point in labeling the cheese as made from kosher milk, because that's the only milk you can make it from. Then we have cheese made of regular milk, meaning there was milk without the supervision of a Jew, but of course is cow's milk, but supervised only during production. The cheese was supervised during production, so that will be kosher cheese, and but not halav Israel cheese. We have cheese without supervision, which was processed with vegetable or microbial rennet. This cheese, as we'll see later, will be allowed according to some opinions. Then we have cheese made with commercial or natural animal rennet that on its face people would think automatically would be not kosher because there's a mixture of meat and dairy or non-kosher meat, but surprisingly this cheese also does not contain any non-kosher elements, so its status is debatable. The one cheese that one can say for sure is not kosher is cheese which contains pieces of meat. Yes, believe it or not, there is such a thing, but this is definitely not kosher. So now, let us go to the Mishnah. We will return to the list of cheese, different types of cheese later, but I want to start with the Mishnah in Masechet Avodah Zarah, chapter 2, Mishnah 5, which is the first source to mention that one cannot eat cheese made by non-Jews. The Mishnah says the following: Sha'al Rabbi Shmuel et Rabbi Yoshua k'hayu me'alchin baderech, amar lo, mipnei ma asru gevinot ha'akum. Rabbi Shmuel asked Rabbi Yoshua as they were walking, and he asked, why did the rabbi forbid the consumption of cheese made by non-Jews? Amar lo, mipnei she'ma'amidim ota bekeva shel nevela. He answers, because the rennet, it comes from the leftovers, the milk that was left over in the stomach of a calf. So this is milk that the calf has sucked from the mother just before it was slaughtered, and the liquids, the acidic liquids in it, help process the cheese. And Rabbi Yoshua says, "Ma'amidim ota bekeva shenevela." It was done. Sometimes they use calves that died a natural death, or because of disease, or of other things which are not kosher according to Jewish law. אמר לו, והלא כבת עולה חמורה מכבת נבלה, ואמרו כהן שדעתו יפה, שורפה חיה. Rabbi Ishmael insisted. He said, the stomach of olah, the sacrifice that is burnt on the mizbeach completely, has a higher status of prohibition than that of a nevela, of an animal that was not slaughtered in a kosher way. Yet, the rabbi said that some of the kohanim would drink the contents of that stomach before burning it on the altar. And if you say that this liquid has the status of food, then they're making a severe, very serious transgression. And since they did that, that shows that the liquid found in the stomach of calves is not considered food, and cheese made from it would be kosher, whether this calf was slaughtered in a kosher way or not. And so he said, no, the reason is not because it comes from the stomach of an animal that was not slaughtered in a kosher way, but rather it comes from the stomach of an animal that was slaughtered as a sacrifice for idolatry. And the level of prohibition of idolatry is much higher. You cannot derive any benefit from it. Amar lo im ken lama lo asaro b'hana'ah. So Rabbi Ishmael pushes, says, if you say that the prohibition involved is idolatry, then the cheese should have been forbidden not only to be eaten, but also to benefit from it in any shape or form. You cannot do business, you cannot sell it. If you got it as a gift, you cannot give it to others. But the rabbis don't say that. They only say that you cannot eat it. So at that point, Rabbi Yoshua digressed from the conversation and asked Rabbi Ishmael to read for him a difficult verse in Shir HaShirim, in the Song of Songs, and the whole matter was forgotten. It's interesting that it's recorded in the Mishnah, but obviously Rabbi Yoshua could not provide an answer to Rabbi Ishmael, either because he knew the answer but wanted to hide it, or because he didn't really know the answer. So, in his commentary to the Mishnah, Maimonides makes a distinction between using the rennet, which is allowed, and using the cow's stomach itself, which is forbidden. Maimonides tried to make the distinction between using the liquid found in the stomach or the stomach itself, and he claims that if the makers of cheese put a section from the stomach in the cheese, it would render it unkosher. But still, the text of the Mishnah remains unclear, and it seems to be a prohibition that was decided on insufficient grounds. And the idea that some people mentioned that it was a barrier against mixing with or mingling with pagans remains unproven. The Talmud in Masechet Avodah Zarah struggles to explain the strange behavior of Rabbi Yoshua, who dodged his colleague's question. And the Talmud argues that the prohibition was created in Israel, and the practice of the rabbis there was not to reveal the reason of a new decree for 1 year, for fear that people will mock the decree. But if they would follow it for 1 year, then it already will take root, and they will not challenge it. So that's why Rabbi Yoshua did not want to reveal the reason of the decree to Rabbi Ishmael. The Talmud then tried to find a reason for the prohibition, and lists the following. One is the fear that a snake bit the cheese and made it poisonous. The second is that there might be some non-kosher milk mixed into the cheese, and one might consume it. Number three is the fear that the non-Jews used the stomach itself as rennet and not the contact of the stomach. Number four is that the cheese was polished with lard. Number five is that the cheese was made with non-kosher vinegar. And number six is the cheese was made with sap from immature trees that were harvested within the 3 first years of their planting, which cannot be and that cannot be used. As a rule of thumb, so many different reasons for one prohibition actually shows there was a lack of knowledge what was the real reason. And another thing that we have to keep in mind is that though the Talmud calls this prohibition a gezerah, a decree, the Mishnah does not call it a gezerah. And that's crucial because it's usually more difficult to repeal or revoke a gezerah than a regular prohibition. But we don't find that the prohibition on cheese had such a status. In the Yerushalmi Talmud, we find a much clearer explanation of the Mishnah. The Yerushalmi says that the prohibition stemmed from the use of animals which were offered to idols. So it was really about idolatry, and they used the stomach itself, and that was a problem. What we have here is a prohibition which depends on a certain condition or concern, and one might say that once this concern is gone, so should the prohibition. The prohibition should be lifted, and this will be discussed in the second part of this episode.